Hi there, I'm Ben Grieder, and welcome to How to Make Your Faith-Based Building More Energy Efficient. In today's workshop, we will discuss why energy efficiency, terms you should know, the steps to energy efficiency success, resources, success stories, and the question of what do you want to do? And I'll give you a couple examples of what you could do. So here's a question. What is energy efficiency? Come on, put up your hand. Shout out your answer. Simply put, energy efficiency is trying to get the same job done using less energy. So for example, the light bulb. We've had LED light bulbs for a while. In fact, ever since the 1970s. The light bulbs that in the 1970s were only housed in very expensive digital displays, not digital displays, but basically light panels in an instrument board, and they've developed quite a bit since then. Today's light bulbs are much more energy efficient, and they simply light the room the same way they always have. I mean, the one thing that's interesting is that the LED light bulb, compared to any other light bulb that came before it, has so much more variety in how to light a room. You can adjust the brightness, adjust the color, so on and so forth. Don't get me started on light bulbs. I'm a big fan. But that is energy efficiency at its simplest. Trying to do the same job using less energy, doing less work. And in a way, I want you to keep thinking about that concept throughout the presentation, because making your faith-based organization more energy efficient is not as hard as you would think. Why energy efficiency? I could be focusing on solar panels right now, and that is now a component of a number of energy efficiency programs. But solar panels is about producing electricity. We are trying to use energy more efficiently here. And the main reasons that I want to focus on that is simply we can reduce the annual maintenance costs of your organization's building. We can reduce greenhouse gas emissions. You can do that with solar panels, but there's a lot of things to consider other than your direct reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, and we'll get into that a little bit later on. Creating momentum and change within your organization. I've encountered a number of faith-based organizations that after investing in a number of energy efficiency upgrades, they've reinvigorated their organization. They've made their organization much more resilient, and it was a good change for the better. And it's the easiest thing you can do right now with the latest announcements in all provinces across the country about energy rebates and energy efficiency programs. It's a really easy thing to do. And especially in Nova Scotia right now, it's even easier because they've created a program, a sub-program within the small business program that specifically is dedicated to helping nonprofit organizations and faith-based organizations increase energy efficiency of their buildings. So, I've presented a lot of energy efficiency pyramids in my day. There is a reason why this energy efficiency pyramid is not perfect. My ability to make a pyramid is much better than this, but I really wanted to throw things out of sorts with this this whole image, um, because nothing in life ever goes the way you expected, and nothing in the world of energy efficiency fits just nicely into place. Um, and so normally you would do an energy assessment, you would do light bulbs and air sealing next, and appliances and ceiling fans after that, then focusing on insulation in the walls and on your ventilation systems, and then on windows, and then finally on solar panels. But, even though that's the way I think that things should be done, doesn't mean that that is always the thing that's the order in which you can actually do things. A good example is if your windows are falling apart and your church really only has money to replace the windows and nothing else, then really that has to come before a lot of these other things. Um, I will say though, out of everything that this pyramid shows, honestly, the most important thing, and even the thing that I think you should get done, even if your windows are in desperate need of replacing, is an energy assessment. You need to understand your building. You need to understand what is happening and what investments can be done in order to make that building more energy efficient. By doing an energy assessment, it will expose you to other ideas and perhaps funding that you wouldn't have considered before. And so, by far, before you have to replace those windows that are cracking, get an energy assessment done. I won't stress it enough. Um, and if you cannot, for whatever reason, that you can't find an energy advisor that can do the energy assessment in time for whatever reason, um, I suggest still think about long term what can be done just by doing a walkthrough of the building, understanding, okay, so how old is the furnace? Do we need to replace that? Understanding the lifespan of certain things in your on the exterior building. Is that sheathing going to last another 10 years, or will work need to be done on that? In a lot of cases, and I this is a concept that sometimes is hard to do in a faith-based building, but sometimes rather than replacing a window, it's better to just replace it with a wall, because in a lot of ways, energy efficiency, if you're thinking about energy efficiency, a wall will always be more energy efficient than a window, no matter how well the window is designed, whether it's a triple paned window, quadruple paned window. A window, because of the sheer material that is used, glass, will always transfer heat much smoother and much more faster than something that has a layered wall concept, even if the wall is made out of wood. So it's something that should definitely be considered, is understanding your building and getting an energy assessment done. These other things will always fall into place later on. And by far, I will say normally that solar panels should come last, but there's also a huge amount of funding out there right now for solar panels. In PEI, it seems makes a lot of sense for a faith-based organization to invest in solar panels. And yeah, for homes right now, solar panels seem to be a good solution rather than doing, some complex replacements with windows. So, I mean, solar panels are one of the most cost-effective sources of energy right now in the world. The windmills and solar panels, those are the two most cost-effective energy production devices in the world. So just something to consider. Let's move on though. There are a lot of terms you should know, and one of those terms is definitely heat pumps. So a heat pump is much like a refrigerator. There's essentially, in the wintertime, you take heat from the outside, and there's always heat outside. This is the thing that's interesting, and it's hard to think about or hard to picture, but there's always a certain percentage of heat in the outdoors, whether it's at negative 20 degrees or negative 25 degrees. And that heat can always be transferred from the outside in. And that is essentially why there's limits to heat pumps in terms of how cold. Once you get to a cold enough temperature, there is no more heat outside, so there's no more heat to transfer. The reason that, it would be harder to transfer heat through air is because, there's a fluid in heat pumps that allow heat to be able to be transported quite easily, much easier than air. It's a refrigerant, and it's essentially just something that has a much lower boiling point than water, and so its ability to capture heat and transfer is much better than water, for example. So in the summertime, it takes the heat from inside and circulates it outside, transporting that heat. There's a couple of mixed conceptions about heat pumps in general, and one of them is that they can dehumidify a room entirely. If you're relying entirely on a heat pump to dehumidify a space, that is not a good use for a heat pump. A heat pump does have a dehumidifier section, but if you think about it, it's not transporting air. A dehumidifier does. It does transport air and moisture in the air, and it's essentially through a process will take that moisture out and then transport that air back into the room. That's a dehumidifier, and dehumidify that air. A heat pump can do that to a certain extent, but it's really just cycling air more than taking that moisture out of the air. And so it's really not the same kind of process that a dehumidifier, it's not the same effect. It doesn't have the same effect as a dehumidifier. So, I've seen people try and rely on heat pumps to dehumidify a basement. That is not a good solution. You should use a dehumidifier as well as a heat pump if you're trying to do that. The air-to-air heat pumps are essentially those things that you normally see in a house. They're essentially single component or multiple component devices that simply take heat from air and circulate that around, or and circulate that around the building. An air to water heat pump is slightly different. It takes essentially heat from air and then transports it to a water that is then heated to a certain temperature, which then is circulated. So you can have an air to water heat pump that is used to circulate warm fluid through a cement floor that has in-floor heat. There are cold climate heat pumps that can be a primary heating source in new energy efficient homes and buildings, but you have to be careful because there are a lot of different kinds of heat pumps out there. And to be honest, cold climate heat pumps is still quite new. So amount of availability for cold climate heat pumps is limited, whereas your normal heat pumps that are designed to be a secondary heat source or a secondary cooling source, not really being relied on to entirely cool a house or entirely heat a house, those are much more common, and you'll find a lot more variety and a lot more contractors who install those than cold climate heat pumps, which are designed to be able to be your primary source of heating in the wintertime. Again, they're designed with energy efficiency in mind in a building. So if you think about it, cold climate heat pump put in an old structure that's not very insulated will not work. And heat pumps can be used for geothermal heating solutions. The UMAMAS, where this conference is held, where this workshop is being presented, has a geothermal heating solution system. And I'm not sure if it uses heat pumps, but you can use heat pumps essentially to augment a geothermal thermal heating solution to make it even more energy efficient. Heat recovery ventilators, they're very handy tools, and they are very useful at making the cycling of air in a building much more energy efficient. They essentially take that warm air and that the heat from that air that's being circulated throughout the building. When a normal air circulation ventilator will take fresh air from outside and transport it inside, and then take the stale air and transport that outside. The heat recovery ventilators, rather than taking that air that's inside and directly putting it outside again, it recovers some of the heat from that air and transfers that into the cold air coming from outside. So it's a nice way to keep some of that heat from escaping. An energy recovery ventilator is just that much more. It recovers heat like an HRV, but also recovers some moisture. And so not only are you, keeping a nice environment in your home when you're using the energy recovery ventilator, but you're also making it very energy efficient. Solar panels. There are solar voltaic panels. There are solar water heaters, and then there's solar shingles. 3 very different products, 3 devices that work in entirely different ways. All of them rely on the sun, but after that, the process changes a lot in terms of what equipment is used and so on and so forth. Solar water heaters are still very popular, but I think solar voltaic panels have actually become much more cost effective, and therefore, I've seen be more cost effective than solar water heaters. Solar shingles are still are available in Canada. You might have heard of Tesla, the Tesla company, investing in solar shingles, and so they have a lineup of product. But there are other companies in Canada that do solar shingles, and it's a very good product if you are replacing your entire roof. But you also need to understand that solar shingles they replace a roof, but they still rely on certain roofing structures to be in place. So it's not like you can replace all your shingles with solar shingles. You still have to rely on some of the structure that's underneath those shingles. It's a little more complicated than solar voltaic or solar water heaters. There's lots of steps. First off, you need to create a group that is committed, and in your organization, it's not necessarily the people that are most knowledgeable. You could have an engineer that would be very handy, you know, um, you could have a carpenter or an electrician that might be very handy to be part of a working group that would be making your organization's building more energy efficient. But ultimately, you want people that are committed and have the time to commit. Um, if they have an understanding of energy efficiency, that's even better. But you don't necessarily need a background in in being an electrician or being an engineer to understand energy efficiency. Um, you need to work to understand your building, your organization, and what funding is out there. And most importantly, like the energy assessment I mentioned before, but also understanding that if you do the energy assessment, what funding is available once you do the energy assessment, what funding is available outside of uh, your normal energy upgrade funding. So there might be funding that is available to make an organization's building more habitable for certain activities, such as pickleball for seniors. And part of that is, space. You need to have a space that's very well temperature controlled, and so heat pumps are essentially very good for making a space that might have ventilation issues or might have heating problems. If that you can put a heat pump in there and encourage a sport like pickleball being played in that space, then that would be funding available that's not necessarily energy efficiency related, but can be used on energy efficiency upgrades. You need to create a plan. So you need to understand what's out there, what's in your building, and create a plan on how and when you're going to do all that and who's going to do it. And you need to apply for that funding and invest. Investing could involve fundraising. And it might be that, if you apply for funding, it might be that you understand better what you need up front in order to do it. So if you have applied for funding and you're like, okay, well, we need to have matching funding for a $30,000 investment into the building, and it's 50% matching, then we might need to raise $15,000. We certainly have $5,000 set aside already, so we just need to raise $10,000. How do we do that? What other kind of organizations might want to invest in our building to also become more a part of the building or spaces we upgrade or create through this investment? And use your momentum to fuel change and resiliency. There's a lot of people that get hyped up about energy efficiency. I know I do. And that might attract a certain amount of people to your organization. It's all about creating that working group and understanding your building. That's a 70-year-old boiler that's at the end of its lifespan, but it looks gorgeous, doesn't it? But unfortunately, it cannot be used anymore in this specific case. Create a plan that has low cost, no cost solutions first. Involve people from your organization. Create a vision, goals, and milestones. Make sure that you always can get more than one quote for a given project. Funders will require you to do this. And fund and invest. There's programs of Efficiency Nova Scotia, Efficiency PEI, and NB Power, Take Charge Newfoundland, all have funding and or rebates that apply to faith-based organizations. And like I said, get creative. If you want to host physical activity sports in your building, or could, then apply for funding for that and pair it with the energy efficiency upgrades you're already doing. One important thing is it doesn't always have to happen at once. I mean, if certain funding requires you to do a certain amount of work all at one time, that's one thing. But over a year, you could do a number of upgrades, and then the next year you could do more. The great thing is that all these investments will make your maintenance costs go down and will end up saving you money that you can then use to reinvest in the building or invest in your community. It's important to welcome change. It's important to make sure that you welcome that change to make your organization more resilient. Um, Change is not necessarily easy to make happen at times, um, but it's definitely necessary in order for your organization to continue to thrive. Um, if you make an investment in a heat pump system, then essentially more community groups will use your space because you have additional heating and cooling capacity for that space year round. So it makes it a much more usable space all year. Then, more community groups will use your space, which will lead to more people being exposed to your community and its values, which could lead to more people joining your organization, which will help make your entire faith community more diverse, and again, will make it more resilient. An organization that has all age groups being represented within its members will be an organization that will continue to thrive. If certain age groups are prevalent and not others, there might be an issue because, if you have a lot of young people, they might not know what the heck they're doing to run the organization. If you have a lot of older people that are continuing to age, who's gonna, essentially take the place of certain committee members and groups, if a lot of people are starting to become not available to do that sort of thing. It's an important concept and thing to consider as you make energy efficiency improvements in your organization. There's lots of resources available, DIY walkthrough, energy efficiency, retrofitting for buildings from Natural Resources Canada, rebates, financing for energy efficiency improvements, and solar upgrades from Efficiency Nova Scotia. The Faithful Footprints program, that's available. It provides funding for United Churches only. The DIY walkthrough, faith-based audit from Faith in the Common Good is a very useful resource, especially if you are lacking capacity within your region for energy advisors. A DIY walkthrough could be a useful solution. And so this presentation has that link, and you can find out more about that through the Faith in the Common Good website. I want to talk about Beacon United Church. So Beacon United Church, they had hired an energy consultant, and they had essentially done an energy efficiency assessment. They got a group together. They acquired assistance from the United Church and from the Ecology Action Center. They found funding and applied for funding for larger energy efficiency upgrades. They started with small things first, and then they got bigger and bigger until they replaced their entire heating, upgraded their entire heating system. And the Beacon United Church is still a thriving faith-based organization on the South Shore of Nova Scotia that continues to be a very large part of the community. A lot of community groups use their spaces. They've developed a very intricate way of raising money from renting out certain rooms to community groups. They've done a quite an impressive job of, you know, improving the resiliency of their uh, organization, and they're a very good example to follow. There's a success story on the Faith and the Common Good website about Beacon United Church. These are a number of examples of what they did. I won't go through them in detail. And so this is the part where I ask you, what do you want to do? Um, what do you want to do in order to make change in your organization and make it more resilient? You can be thinking about energy efficiency. You could also be thinking about, in general, climate change and how the community will adapt. I've seen faith-based organizations become the hub of a community by being looking at how they can be a resource in times of environmental distress, such as hurricanes, and how, they can get funding to be a hub. Being able to get funding so they can have heating and power when all other buildings in the area don't, and how people can rely on that community, that organization, even if they're not part of that faith. So those are things that you should consider. What do you want to do? It's all entirely up to you. I'll just relate this poster here. This is a poster from World War II. It's an American poster. I have it up in my office right now. It's very interesting because some of the messaging you see in this poster, don't heat unused rooms, keep windows closed, draw window shades at night. That is still a very useful concept for keeping the heat in. These were all very simple steps in the 1940s to save energy so that the fuel they needed for the World War II could be used for war efforts. If you think about it, if we were able to really put a lot of effort into energy efficiency and energy conservation, such as this poster is promoting, just like they did it in World War II, what would this world look like? Would we be making a lot of changes in how we do things? Would we be more resilient? It's a question that I'll leave it up to you to answer. But it's just food for thought. So I hope you've enjoyed this presentation, and I hope you enjoy this process of exploring energy efficiency in your organization. Thank you very much.